Velo voices, many voices, one passion. Pro cycling, for fans, by fans.
Hello and welcome to podcast number 12 on June 9th, 2013. For Velo Voices, this is Chris in Virginia, and of course I'm joined by Tim and Kathy in London. How are you guys doing?
Very well, thank you.
Tim, how's it going?
Yeah, we're doing well. We're enjoying the summer sun for once.
Yes, well, it is snowing in Switzerland, so. All right, in today's show we're going to talk about how Brad wigged out of the Tour. We're going to talk about Vini Fantini and how they're glowing nowhere. We'll see if Brian Cookson has the good recipe for change at the UCI. Of course, we got to talk about building a team around the haunches of fame, Fabian Cancellara. We will, of course, discuss what's happened at the Criterium du Dauphine. We'll touch a little bit on the Tour de Suisse, which started yesterday, I think. And we will talk about what's happening in the next 2 weeks. So obviously the biggest news of the last 2 weeks, other than, the finish of the Giro, is that Bradley Wiggins will not be riding the Tour de France in support of his teammate Chris Froome. So Tim, let me start out with you. What do you think this means? Is this positive, negative for Team Sky? Where do we go?
On balance, strange as it may sound, I actually think it's slightly positive for Sky. I think the big negative is that there's no doubt that they will miss Wiggins, particularly in places like the team time trial. Although arguably not as much as it would be in another team, because they'll still be one of the favourites for a top three finish there. They've got Froome, they've got Ports, they've got Geraint Thomas, they've got Edvald Boasson-Hagen, and those four have all finished in the top 10 in the time trial at the Dauphine this week. So the negative maybe not as big, but I think the big positive has to be that it puts a complete end to all the silly team politics and all the internal bickering about who's number one. It's absolutely clear now. Chris Froome is the boss. It will do wonders for his state of mind, and it will do wonders for the team as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes the pressure off of Froome, having to maybe, he would have maybe had to kind of live the Le Mans Eno situation that we had in '86 all over again. And I was looking forward to that. I was kind of looking forward to that drama, and I feel really let down. Okay, so Kathy, what is your take on this? Are the reports of a knee injury and not being fit enough? Is this a graceful way for Wiggins to exit the stage? Because it's kind of strange that the defending champion of the Tour de France isn't coming back to defend his title.
It is strange that he's not coming back to defend his title. We don't know what the state of his injuries are or if he's over his chest infection. I've heard all kinds of different things over the last week. I think, maybe it's a bit of both. They figure, well, he's not going to be 100%. If he was going to be, undisputed leader, I bet they would have taken him anyway. But being as they've, what they want is to win. So, they're not going to have dead wood. I mean, they've been shut. And also, even if he was in shape, my question is, how would he have helped Froome if he rode for Froome? Because, he can't climb on his own. So, you can't help a guy in a time trial, can you? I mean, so I wasn't ever sure exactly where this help was going to come from that he was going to give, unless it was, in the early stages where he's chasing down breakaways or something. But, that doesn't sound like something he'd do, because if anybody's read David Miller's book, he comes across as somebody that, doesn't work a lot for other team members,
Yeah, I could definitely see him playing a role like Michael Rogers played last year, where early on in these climbs, he gets on the front and he just sets like, a blistering pace. And he's definitely capable of that. I mean, let's not fool ourselves. Wiggins is one of the top 10. He, arguably is one of the top 5 stage racers in the entire world right now, but he's definitely in the top 10. So he could have helped. How and where, and with what attitude? I think that those are all the questions that nobody could answer, and that's maybe why he's not really going. So something else I've heard And this just blew my mind, and I can't really get my head about it. But I heard some people speculating this week that they thought that Wiggins' career was done. Tim, what do you make of that?
No, I don't think his career's done at all. Do you know what? I don't even think his 2013's done yet. I think what we might see is he might not race to win the Vuelta, but he might race the Vuelta in order to get himself fit for the Worlds. I think the road race maybe isn't suited to him, but he might well have a crack at the time trial.
Yeah, it would be really interesting too. I mean, the World's road course, I know that everybody's locking in kind of Nibali for that, and I know even Cancellara has his eye on that. I think that might be a little too tough for Cancellara, but we'll see. It would be really interesting. I mean, what if we came out of 2013 with Wiggins as the road race world champion?
Oh, dear God.
That is a possibility.
Dear God.
Right?
No.
So, Kathy, you're only allowed to say the number of no's for the different colors of the jersey. I think you said way more than that.
Well, I'll put some other colors on. I mean, as far as Wiggins' career over, I agree with Tim. I don't think that's true. I mean, who knows what other Grand Tour he's going to be able to win because, unless they're like they were with, a lot of time trials or something. Because, he is getting up there. And, as they go along, people are going to find ways of beating the Team Sky sort of juggernaut. He's always been a bit topsy-turvy emotionally, I think, would be fair to say, attitude-wise. And I don't know, maybe, when he's not winning all the time, maybe he'll just go for stage races, stage races, the week-long ones. Or, he keeps saying he's going to go into the classics if he actually got some fat on him and actually got a little bit of, got a little bit of weight so that he wasn't all over the cobbles. That, that could be an idea. But I'd actually heard rumors that he might be going back to track cycling to prepare for Rio. It's a weird one, but, who knows?
Yeah, it's possible. I think for all the questions there have been over the last couple of months about his physical fitness, and I think there is something in that. I think the bigger issue with him this year has been his mental fitness. Yeah,
and we've seen guys like Philippe Gilbert have super years, and then the next year not good at all, and then comes back. I think Gilbert he's been pretty good this year. I mean, he hasn't been the form that he had 2 years ago, but he's kind of back, and I'm wondering if Wiggins is kind of go through that same cycle. Last year when he won the Tour, he had such super form. He won everything. I mean, he had won everything that he did, right? And so we'll see if his body kind of just needs a season of rest, and then he can come back stronger. Okay, so we're not going to have Wiggins at the Tour. Fabian Cancellara this week confirmed, and we all knew this was going to happen, that he's not going to the Tour. Tom Bonen's not going to the Tour. Samuel Sanchez, who just won a sweet stage at the Dauphine this week, is not going to the Tour. I hear that Jelle Van den Dert's not going to the Tour. And I don't even know the list of other guys that you would expect to be at the Tour who aren't going to be there. And I'm going to the Tour. and I'm mad that these guys aren't going to be there.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So, is the Tour losing its prestige? This is the 100th edition of the Tour de France, people. This only happens once. Why aren't guys like Fabian Cancellara fighting to be on the squad?
Well, Fabian, there's no prologue. So what would his objective be for this tour? Because his objective is to win the prologue, be in yellow for a week, really get the sponsors, just tons of airtime, get their money's worth, and then, help a grant, the Schleck brothers, try to drill it on the front. Well, he doesn't have a prologue. He doesn't have the Schleck brothers. He's targeting the Worlds. The Vuelta would be better for him to ride. I don't think that he's ducking out because, he can't be bothered. I think it's kind of, what's the objective?
Sure.
If it's stage races they're looking to set up, you've got Jens. He's really good at setting up stage wins for the guys, and they're just I don't see that it makes sense for Cancellara to go if he's got other objectives, because he wouldn't have a real one for this.
So, Tim, is this a change, though? Because it didn't used to be about objectives. It used to be about, this is the Tour de France. This is the biggest stage race in the world. You know, regardless of whether you're going to win for your sponsors, you're still going to get TV time. There's still going to be Fabian Cancellara. There he is, one of the best racers in the world. And, you know, there could be some stage victories for him. Is this a shift?
I think there's a recognition that a modern Grand Tour is so difficult and so demanding, and there is so little between the top competitors that it's just not feasible now to race 3 or even 2 in many cases in the same year. And you know, I mean, has the Tour lost its prestige? No. I mean, you were talking earlier, Chris, about whether Wiggins was in the top 5 or the top 10, and for me, there's 7 top stage racers in the world. There's Wiggins, there's Nibali. Those two aren't there, and Nibali's got many good reasons why he is now he's won the Giro. He's now focusing on the Worlds, clearly, which are on home soil. But if you look at the rest of them, you've got Chris Froome, Alberto Contador, Alejandro Valverde, Joaquin Rodriguez, Cadel Evans. You know, that's a pretty hefty field. And then you look at the sprinters. Cav will be there, Sagan, Greipel, Kittel. And if you compare the field that will line up at the 100th Tour against the one that lined up at the Giro and the likely line-up at the Vuelta, there is no comparison. The Tour is still miles ahead in terms of the quality of the field it attracts.
Well, that's true. And one guy you didn't mention who I would throw in that kind of list of 7 is Ryder Hijadal. So he'll be there as well. So, okay, well, I'm just really bummed that I don't get to see the haunches of glory come July. I guess.
I think that's called the Sacred Haunches. I've decided to start a society for it, so the Sacred Haunches Society.
Well, you know, let's brighten up my day by talking about something that's even brighter. Oh, wait, it isn't. The glowing of Vini Fantini.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of weeks ago when we had our podcast, we talked about DeLuca and what an idiot he was, and we were sad for all of his teammates that, you know, had to be subjected to his doping positive. And of course, now we have Sant'Ambrogio coming out with a positive for the same substance. So, Tim, what's going to happen to Vini Fantini? Are they going to stick around? Or are they going to be a viable team? Are we going to see them? Or you think we're done with the glow sticks?
I don't think it's necessarily the end for them. I think clearly the last 2 or 3 weeks has not panned out the way they would have liked it to have been. And, you know, blame is such a strong word. I think the team has to accept that they have made a couple of pretty poor errors with DeLuca and Sant'Ambrogio. But I think at the same time, it's probably reasonable to assume that they were acting under their own compulsion, and it wasn't necessarily a team program of doping. So the closest comparison I can think to it in recent years is Vacansoleil, which whenever it was 2010, I think it was, they signed everyone's favourite Italian, Riccardo Rico, and also Ezequiel Mosquera, who I think had finished second at the Vuelta the year before, and they both got busted effectively in the off season. So the impact perhaps wasn't as great as it breaking across the Giro, but they lost 2-star riders in the space of a few weeks. They kept going.
All right, so let me see if this is a fair question to ask. And Kathy, we hear this on Twitter all the time. So if guys are getting busted for EPO and they're not getting on the podium, what do we make of the guys that are getting on the podium? Is that a fair question to ask?
I don't think so, because, I mean, it doesn't, just because you take EPO doesn't automatically mean you're going to win. It doesn't automatically mean you're going to be on the podium. And, you know, and it also doesn't mean that the guys ahead of you are doping or doping better. I mean, I think, you know, there's so many reasons you win a bike race or you don't. And there's experience, there's talent, there's team tactics, there's fitness levels, there's luck, you know. So I really don't think, you know, and you know, considering DeLuca is 150 years old in dog years as a cyclist. So, you know, for him to be, for it to be said, oh, well, he was doing EPO, obviously the guys in front of him must have been, because, you know, he didn't even get anywhere near up, you know, near the podium. Well, that's kind of stupid because, you know, he's like their dad. You know, and then Sant'Ambrogio is just, I don't think had the experience or Do you know?
Well, he was
do you
like
know what I mean?
he was like 83rd. He was like 83rd in the Giro last year.
So
So he definitely wasn't on the level of a Nibali.
No,
but
I mean,
I can see why people distrust, though. With the history and all that's gone on, and you have people saying, "Oh, this is a clean sport," and then all of a sudden you have all these doping positives at the Giro.
Well, first of all, it's stupid to say it's a clean sport because it's like it's not yet. I mean, and there's a long way to go. I mean, is it cleaner? I think it probably is, yeah. But is it clean, completely clean, squeaky clean? No. I mean, how can you say that? I mean, it's so entrenched.
And if you take DeLuca as the example, there's someone who's had a long career, and at the beginning of his career, people would have been able to take EPO pretty much with impunity because there was no test. And now for several years we've had a test, and that testing procedure evolves constantly. It's now capable of capturing much lower levels of EPO. Even people who are microdosing potentially aren't safe now. So EPO may be an old drug, but certainly the gap between the testers and those who choose to cheat is much less now than it ought to be. But yeah, I think you'd be a fool to say the sport is clean, but it's certainly cleaner.
Yeah, one of the things that disappointed me a little bit was that they interviewed Michele Acquioni after the second positive came out, and he was kind of like, "Yeah, we were suspicious of those guys before they lined up." And I just thought to myself, Michele, if that's true,
why are you letting them in the race then?
Yeah, go to them, and especially with DeLuca. Like, DeLuca tarnished their race before. If I was Michele, I would have went to Vini and I would have said, "Listen, your team can come, but that guy can't." And I know that he signed for them very late, but I would have kind of stood my ground there. So, okay. So coming up is hopefully an election that could help fix this problem. The election for the UCI president. And the news this week is that Brian Cookson is going to run against Pat McQuaid. For now, he's the only other candidate who we hear could be running. Just really quickly, Inner Ring had a great piece on how the UCI president gets elected. But essentially, he is elected by the Congress, and the Congress is made up of delegates that are, from the different federations around the world. And to get elected, you just have to have a simple majority. There's 42 delegates, so you have to have a simple majority of 22 delegates. And it's interesting the way the delegates split up. Africa has 7, Asia has 9, America has 9, Europe has 14, Oceania has 3. And so, you can become the president lots of different ways. One strategy that I've heard is that McQuaid is going out to the developing countries, of Africa and inside of Asia and saying, "I'm going to, put all my dollars behind you," because he can get, basically 16 votes right there. And then if he split Europe, he could become the president. So anyway, it's going to be interesting to see the way this shakes out. But I don't know much about Cookson. I know that he's the president of British Cycling. But Tim, what else do we know about him?
So Cookson's been president of British Cycling since 1997, and something actually I didn't know about that particular role until earlier today was that actually that's an unpaid role. He originally joined British Cycling as a member of an emergency committee. I mean, the organisation was on the point of becoming insolvent in 1996, so he could actually claim to say that he helped save British Cycling. But he's got a long history in the sport. He's raced at a reasonable level. He's been involved in the running of the sport in various roles since the early 1980s. A number of administrative roles. He's a qualified UCI race commissaire. And as far as his role on the UCI is concerned, he's been part of the UCI Management Committee since 2009, and he's currently the president of the Road Commission. So he's got a very broad range of experiences, and I think it's also fair to say that he's achieved quite a lot. I think back when he took over in '97, British Cycling effectively was Chris Boardman and Max Sciandri, if anyone remembers him.
Right.
And now you look on his you look at his record, and under his watch, Britain's won 19 Olympic golds, 28 Paralympic golds, produced its first Tour de France winner. It's seen a lot of growth in grassroots, both in terms of participation in the sport and just generally people cycling, full stop. And you know what? How bad a guy can he be? He shares his birthday with Thomas Verkler.
Well, one of the things that's been interesting is the politics that has already started over this. So Cookson announces that he's going to run, and so McQuaid leaks a letter that he's written to Federation presidents. Just let me read the first 2 paragraphs of this. And Kathy, try not to laugh after I read the first one. He has kind of 2 points that he starts with. He says, quote, "First, it is clear that a small group of activists has banded together to try, by whatever means, to hijack and derail my candidature in the coming election. Their agenda is narrow and negative. They have nothing positive or constructive to offer in discussions about cycling's future. I am grateful to Swiss Cycling for their nomination, as well as the Board of Cycling Ireland for their endorsement of my nomination, which has only been withdrawn for a procedural technicality."
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm not sure at what point Pat decided this was the Boston Tea Party.
I mean, that paragraph right there is incredible. Anyway, so then he says this, he goes, "Second, over the past few weeks, I have received a number of veiled threats whose clear intention has been to try to force me to withdraw my candidacy. You can be sure, however, that I will not be intimidated by people who have no interest in a transparent democracy, or either now or in the future. I have now been informed by the president of British Cycling, Brian Cookson, that he plans to announce that he will stand against me in the presidency elections, a decision which will no doubt be welcomed by activists and by those making covert threats against me." I really almost can't read this with a straight face.
Do you know, you wonder when he was dictating that to, his PA or something. What? But anyway, I would say that as far as the Cookson thing goes, the thing that I have a problem with is his ties with Team Sky, because British Cycling and Team Sky are so inextricably linked. And I would hope that the manifesto would say how he would extract himself from that, because he would have to, because right. is, and he has to be absolutely transparent about that, and as soon as possible. So if we want to go for a Star Wars metaphor, if Team Sky is the Death Star, then is Brian Cookson the Phantom Menace?
As long as he's not Jar Jar Binks, I don't care.
Oh, okay, that's fair enough.
But it's a good point, Kathy. I think he is on the operating board of Team Sky, and clearly that is a conflict of interest that he would have to deal with should he ever be voted in. So I think he has to be very clear in his manifesto what the way forward is there.
Yeah, and for me, he definitely needs to fix that conflict of interest if he's going to be the UCI president. But the fact that he has experience in ownership of a pro team, actually, for me, that's a positive. It's like he knows what's going on at a certain level in pro cycling. So, when people say, "Oh, he has commercial experience," I like that. I like that he has that kind of experience. But you're right; it's a conflict of interest the moment he says that he's going to run for president.
Yeah. Okay, I think if you look at his background as well. Sorry, Chris. I think here's a guy who has a track record of being able to drive change and positive change within British cycling, and at a time when everyone, I think, is clamouring for the UCI to drive a similar agenda, then someone of Cookson's background has to be attractive, you would think.
Yeah. So another thing that McQuaid said in his letter, or that he insinuated, is that Cookson was having secret meetings with Makarov, who's Russia's president of their cycling federation, who also has kind of some ownership in Katusha. So he wanted to know what were these secret meetings about, and of course he's concerned because the European votes that Makarov could influence, I'm sure, are many. So Makarov responded, and this is one of the paragraphs from his response. He said, "One of democracy's main principle is freedom of choice. And because of that, Mr. Cookson's candidacy, just as anyone else's for that matter, cannot be considered as odd," which that's how McQuaid described it. "Mr. Cookson has utilized his right, nothing more. And concerning the meeting with Mr. Makarov and Mr. Cookson, it was not secretive and took place within the scope of cooperation between national cycling federations. A corresponding press release was publicized on the official site of Russian cycling on May 15th. So it's interesting just to see the shots that these guys are taking. And and how Makarov's kind of in the background, maybe manipulating some of this.
Yeah, and I do wonder whether Pat's made a couple of errors here in terms of, he's the one really who's thrown the first punch, and in addition to Makarov, his letter, he doesn't hold back in his opinions about Makarov, and similarly, Wojciech Walkiewicz, who's another former management committee member, and I notice he's come back today accusing McQuaid of offering roles within the UCI in exchange for votes. So do you know what? if you're going to start a war of words, you have to be careful, because eventually that escalates, and Pat may find that maybe he's opened his mouth a little bit too soon, and regardless of what the truth is and isn't, it doesn't put cycling in a great light to have all this mudslinging in public.
Yeah, and I say never mess with a Russian who's named after a handgun. You just don't do that.
Him and his mate, Mr. Kalashnikov.
All right. Before we get into the Dauphine news, I wanted to discuss one other nugget of news that we heard this last week, and that is that Trek Bicycles is planning on picking up the tab for the Radio Shack Trek team, and they plan on purchasing the license held by Becca and forming a team around Fabian Cancellara.
Hurrah!
And I haven't heard that the team is going to be called Team Fondue yet, but
we're in negotiations.
You're in negotiations. Okay, so the other thing I heard around this, though, was that Frank Schleck would be jettisoned from his contract and that they would only be carrying Andy. You guys have any thoughts on this?
Well, I've got a lot of thoughts on this. First of all, building a team around Fabs. Your question I see on the agenda is he the type that you build an entire team around? Well, yes. Of course you do. No. He is a bit of a superstar, He's very
He
well...
is, but even,
hang on.
Even Cannondale is looking for somebody to... Okay,
let me speak. Which helps. And he wins the races that they build special bikes for. So they get a lot of publicity from him in particular. Is it enough for a team? No, I don't think so. I mean, certainly not in the long run, because he is getting up there. But I think that you could do worse, and to have him on the team as like a really experienced leader. And hopefully Jens will stay on for another year or so to help bring up other younger riders, to shine. I don't think that that's outside the realm of possibilities, that would be a really good role for him. I think that, he really does command a lot of respect in the peloton, and I'm sure he does in his team. So, they could do worse. I mean, I don't think that it's a long-term solution, but I certainly think that, considering the crap that's gone on with that team, if they are gonna do something, for God's sake, you can't build the team around Andy Schleck anymore. So, so he is, he's the biggest thing they've got. But as for Frank being jettisoned, I mean, I think we always say that it's always best if they don't race together, but they've always said that they would never race on separate teams. So, I think that maybe if they don't offer Frank a contract, would Andy try to get out of his?
Yeah, and I've also heard rumors that maybe Frank would try to do something like become a director sportif with them. But I just think Frank's still a little too young to hang it up. I think he still has some good racing in him.
But I also he can't though, can he? Because isn't that rule of anybody banned after 2011 can't then go on to management or DS? That's a UCI rule, wasn't it?
I know that's true if you're banned for life.
No,
but I'm not
it's
sure
any
if you serve
ban.
one suspension.
It was any
okay,
ban.
I don't know the rule, so it could be. We'll have to check into that. So, I mean, I was just thinking about, before I almost rudely interrupted you, Kathy, I was thinking about, even Cannondale. I mean, they have a superstar in Sagan, but they're looking for somebody else to kind of, at least for their, grand tours. Because it's all about, in reality, the classics are at the beginning of the season, and we all enjoy those. But the season's long, and it mostly consists of the grand tours. And so you got to have riders that can represent your brand the entire year.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
But I mean, who what they would take Sagan? Is that what
No,
you
I'm
were
just saying
gonna
that
say?
I'm just saying that even Cannondale's looking for a GC guy because Sagan can't be the only guy that represents them.
Yeah.
There has to be somebody else who can kind of, be in the Grand Tours and excel. And I think that's the same thing with Radio Shack. I mean, nobody can deny that Fabian, especially this year, right? He's arguably the best classics rider ever.
Yeah.
I think you can start to make that argument, right? When you talk about him and Bonin, those two guys, right, they stand out. But I think, even Quick-Step has tried to figure out ways that they can become more than just a classics team.
Yeah, and certainly, Trek is an American company, and Americans a lot of times don't have any idea that people ride their bikes during the spring. They just see the Tour de France. Not to be horrible, but they just don't get it televised. It's just not well known over there. You know what I mean? So it's not their fault they don't know it. But I don't know who would the GC person be if we could buy anybody? Who would you buy?
It's a great question, and I think
you should answer it.
Well, I think I don't know that person exists right now. I think that you would want somebody like a Nibali, or maybe it's a young guy who's coming up like a Talansky, or I don't even know. Talansky would be great because he has that American audience bend, and so that would be great for Trek. But I think they're in a tough place right now. I think Trek wants to find somebody that can kind of fill that brand hole.
Yeah.
But there just isn't anybody right now who can do that, except for Cancellara. And he does. Obviously, the sale of Trek Domani bikes has gone through the roof because of Cancellara, I would say. So a lot of those bikes are selling. But they need to be selling Madones, right? Because that's a huge product line of theirs.
Yeah.
And so what's going to help sell those bicycles? I think that's the question. All right. Well, it'll be exciting to see a team, though, that's kind of focused around Cancellara, because he was already dominant in the classics. And if he has an entire team built solely around him, who knows what he could do.
Well, yes,
So.
and sponsoring, second sponsor being Team Fondue. It'll be great.
All right. Well, we've had some awesome racing this week. It started at last weekend, and the Dauphine ended today, actually. So, Tim, why don't you take us through what happened in the Critérium du Dauphine?
Yeah, so the Dauphiné, the key warm-up race really for the Tour de France. The faces might have been slightly different from 2012, but the team name on the jersey and the end result were basically the same. Sky served notice of their intentions for the month of July by basically riding roughshod over their competition. So that's Alberto Contador, Alejandro Valverde, Joaquim Rodriguez, and all the others. But yeah, a great race for Sky. Fans of French racing would have been pleased by the performance of Europcar, who won a couple of stages and held the yellow jersey for 3 days. But this race really was all about Sky. But having said that, the race started well for the French team. Every cycling fan's favourite car rental firm won the short opening stage. That featured 4 climbs, including a couple of Cat 1s and a Cat 3 summit finish. The win came courtesy of Canadian David Veilleux. Got into the day's 4-man break and then soloed off the front with 47 kilometres left. Finished nearly 2 minutes ahead of a frustrated Gianni Meersman, who won the bunch sprint from the peloton. So, always good to have a local win to start the race, I think.
Yeah, there wasn't much on offer this week for the sprinters, and I was really surprised that the group let Veilleux get away. But they just missed. They did not estimate properly the distance of it. Was so short compared to a lot of these other mountain stages that they do, that they ran out of road to catch him, and he was a monster in those last 30 kilometers. So that was an awesome victory. All right, so what happened then in stage 2?
Yeah, stage 2 was lumpy 6 categorised climbs, but this time the sprinters teams did get it right. They brought it all back together, and in what ended up being quite a chaotic sprint, Cannondale's Elia Viviani took his first win of the season with some ease, with Meersman in second place for the second consecutive day.
Poor Meersman. All right, then stage 3, we had Edvald Balsenhagen win, and Kathy, I always love your Haagen-Dazs tweets.
Well, he's just so chubby.
Yeah. So what happened?
Chubby cheeked.
His kit is money though. So Tim, what happened? What happened in stage 3? How did he get away?
So, I mean, it was a fairly flat stage, but it had a bit of a sting in the tail. Category 3 climb, which summited about 10k from the finish. We had Johnny Hoogerland attacking on the ascent, managed to avoid any barbed wire this time, but he was immediately closed down by Sylvain Chavanel, and I think we'll see quite a bit from those two during the tour. We then saw a few others attacking, Laurent Didier, Bart de Klerk, and OPQS's Mikhail Kwiatkowski. But ultimately, it all came back together. And as you say, Geraint Thomas had the honour of leading out Edvald Higgs, Bosenhagen, and Das for what ended up being a relatively simple win. In fact, Thomas's lead out took him so close to the line, it took Bosenhagen less time to finish the sprint than it took me to pronounce his name.
Right.
But he's someone who's coming for quite a bit of criticism for maybe having a bit too much of an easy life. But he came here off the back of winning a stage, the points jersey, and the overall at his home tour of Norway.
Yeah.
So he's coming into some form just in time for the tour, where we can expect him to be one of the key men setting the tempo for Sky, certainly in the lower parts of the big climbs.
Yeah, for me, when Hoogerland and Chavanel are on the attack, all is right in the world. So I hope we see more of that in July, because I love that. All right, so then we had the stage 4 individual time trial, and I think this, out of all the stages of the race, might have been the most telling for the Tour de France. What do you think?
Yeah, Tim? Definitely. Very interesting as a real bellwether of form. So it was a 32.5k individual time trial. It was flat. It wasn't overly technical. So very different from the very kind of mixed up stages that we had at the Giro. So this was basically a pretty straightforward test of power and aero efficiency. So absolutely no surprise then that the winner was double world champion Tony Martin. Garmin Sharp's Rowan Dennis was second. He took over the yellow jersey from Veilleux. But the real story, as you say, that was happening elsewhere on the road as Sky put 4 men in the top 10, including third for Chris Froome, his mate Richie Porte, then overtook the man who started 2 minutes ahead of him, some guy named Alberto Contador. And he looked terrible in those last few kilometres. He was really labouring, climbing all over his bike, and he finished 61st. He lost nearly 3 minutes to Froome. And as I say, that's the most uncomfortable I've ever seen Contador in the time trial.
Yeah, I mean, this is the same Alberto Contador who in 2009 beat Fabian Cancellara, right? So it's going to be really interesting to see if he can get his act together in the time trial before July. And of course, a lot of people are speculating why he's not as good as he once was in the time trial. For me, I mean, I looked at Martin. I just had to go back and look at how efficient he is. And I think there's a couple of guys in the world who can give him a run for his money. We obviously have Fabian Cancellara. I think Taylor Phinney showed last year in the World Championships that he's also a guy that could maybe challenge Martin. And I think the World Championships time trial this year, if all those guys come with good form, is going to be an epic, epic battle. But you're right. The story was really about how much time Contador lost and that last, passing by Port. I mean, that had to be a dagger in the heart of Contador. So we'll see.
I don't think you can count him out, though. I mean,
you definitely can't.
Absolutely not.
He's never won the Dauphiné, even though he's been up second and third, in 2009, 2010, But he says that he's had his hay fever allergies, and that's come out before. That's not suddenly new. Right.
And I know that the allergy season too has extended in Europe because they're kind of having that cold spring.
So
right?
I mean, I think that he didn't do as well as he thought he was going to, but I don't think that this means that Froome's going to walk the Tour.
No, I don't either. And whenever Alberto Contador is in a Grand Tour, you cannot count him out.
Well, exactly. Particularly the Tour de France.
Yeah, I mean, look what happened last year in the Vuelta, right? He can turn a race, in one stage, he can turn a race upside down on its head. Yeah. So, all right. So, but interestingly enough, that time trial took us into stage 5, which was also kind of maybe part 2 of the story, Tim, about who's looking good for the Tour.
Yeah, sure. Stage 5, it's the first really big summit finish on the Hors category climb at Val Morel. And first part of the story, one that became very familiar during the month of July last year. Bottom of the final climb, Sky come to the front, they crank up the tempo, and people start dropping off the back. We had Valverde trying to attack, and he just hung there 20-25 metres off the front, and he never ever looked like getting away. But then we had Contador attacking inside the final kilometre, obviously looking to prove a point after the previous day, and actually looking pretty good. Maybe not quite at 100%, but then you don't necessarily want to be at 100% at this point of the season. But the really impressive thing was watching Chris Froome. I mean, he just kicked through the gears and he sailed past him to take both the stage and the overall lead. And you have to spare a thought as well for Radio Shack's Matt Boucher, who must have thought that he was going to win, and he was pretty much within sight of the line until first Contador, and then Froome came absolutely flying past him. But we talk about Froome and Contador being the big battle for July, and that's starting to look pretty tasty already.
Yeah, and where's Joaquin Rodriguez? I mean, where is he? I didn't see him anywhere in this race.
No,
Yeah, he certainly doesn't appear to have the kind of form that I think. If you had to rate them in terms of form, I think you have to put Froome number one at the moment. Contador is a little way behind, but clearly has a little bit more to come. Valverde is there or thereabouts. Rodriguez looks a little short at the moment. Even on the final stage today, he was coming in 10-15 seconds behind the guys ahead of him. So difficult to gauge, and certainly he's not in the kind of form that he was in last year, but that's not to say he might not be in 4 weeks' time.
Yeah, this isn't the Dauphine isn't a predictor of what's going to happen at the Tour. It gives us some hints. Okay, so we had that stage 5 where Froome wins the summit there, and then we have a stage that was more of it was a downhill finish, but with lots of rolling terrain.
What I like to describe as lumpy as anything, and a long downhill climb to a long downhill descent to the finish, the kind of stage that's really ideally cut out for a breakaway. And sure enough, we ended up with a 4-man group, which in the closing kilometres always had at least a minute on the peloton, and the 4 men in the group were the face that launched 1,000 grimaces, Tommy Verkler, Movistar's Jose Herrada, and then the Astana pair of Kevin Seldreas and Igor Silin, both of whom really are climbers rather than sprinters. But no surprise that Seldreas and Silin tried to exploit their numerical advantage with a series of fakes and half attacks in the closing couple of kilometres. But Verkler stood up to the pressure of being piggy in the middle. He launched his sprint early, and he took his first win of 2013 with actually quite a bit of ease. And this comes less than 2 months after, if you remember, after he broke his collarbone at Amstel Gold. So great recovery.
Yeah, it's going to be cool to see if he can carry this form into the Tour and what he and Roland, could do together. Those that pair of Astana riders, though, I was screaming at the television, Tim. I mean, they blew it. They needed to have some guy just go as hard as he could and have the other guy just sit wheels and make Vogler chase. And then if I was in the team car of Astana, I would have been like, what are you guys doing? I could not understand it. I was just like, there's no way that these guys shouldn't be able to win this.
Yeah, and in those last couple of 100 metres, I mean, it wasn't just that Verkler won easily. Herrada jumped the two of them, and he's no great sprinter, and it just looked like Seldreas and Silin were running on empty tanks.
Yeah.
So what looked like feints was probably them putting every last ounce of effort in. But you'd have thought with two of them against Vogler that they might have made a better job of it.
Yeah, because I watched and Vogler did a lot of work in the break. It's not like he just sat wheels the whole time. You're right, he was grimacing. So that blew my mind. All right, so then in stage 7, I was thinking about you and Cherie, Tim, because I know you were pleased with the winner.
Oh yeah, definitely. Stage 7 was that's the stage that gave us the early climb of Alpe d'Huez, which sadly we didn't get to see on TV. But then we had a 1-2 punch to finish with. So there's the Cat 1 Col de Noyer, followed by a nice little descent and then a little Cat 3 climb to the finish. So we had a big 20-man break that went away early, but they were wrapped up pretty much on the Col de Noyer. And then about 1.5-2 kilometres from the summit, Sami Sanchez and Jakob Fuglsang went attacking over the top. And they stayed away. They survived to fight it out for the stage win. and Sanchez won the sprint. And amazing to think, actually, that's his first win in something like 14 or 15 months since he won the Tour of the Basque Country last year.
Yeah,
but,
he's had a lot of close calls, even with that time trial in the Giro this year, but he sealed the deal, and it was nice to see that big smile.
So, I liked it when he cried at the end.
Right. Yeah, I'm supposed to cry this episode. So were you, Tim. We've forgotten about that, but we still have some time. All right.
But it was great to see how much the stage win meant to him, and hopefully it'll give his team a bit of a spur on for the Tour and for the rest of the season. But really, it was a stage that was dominated by the Spaniards. Sanchez won. Then we saw the same, basically the three amigos who lit up the Vuelta last year. They were all pretty active at the front of the GC group. Contador was active, Valverde was active, and this was the one day really when we did see Rodriguez really trying to push hard. But do you know what? Chris Froome never really looked in any trouble whatsoever. And just at the end, Richie Porte put in a big dig. Really impressive acceleration. Leapfrogged his way into third on the day, and it strengthened his position in second overall. But it was interesting. At the end of the day, you had Froome in first, you had Porte in second, and then Michael Rogers, who was a Sky rider last year, in third. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then we had stage 8. The final stage was today, and so Tim, kind of wrap this up for us and tell us how it finished.
Yeah, so Cannondale's Alessandro De Marchi, he'd actually been the last man who was caught from Saturday's big breakaway, and yet again he was the last man standing from a 24-man break today, which concluded with a summit finish at Vesoul. On the final climb, we had Contador having a real go, but then he dropped back, playing the team role to help Michael Rogers. Then Froome and Porte attacked. I think it seemed fairly clear that Froome was trying to help Porte to a stage win, but they couldn't catch De Marchi, and he crossed the line with something like a 24 second advantage. So, big effort over 2 days for him, well rewarded.
I have to say, the thing that I found strange about that stage was when Chris Froome and Richie Porte kind of, attacked and went away, and Froome kept looking back in it almost nostalgically, like Andy or Frank, but also, and it looked like he was doing what he did to Wiggins last year of this encouraging thing, which just really looks, unfortunately, like he's just yelling at the guy and trying to embarrass him. So I think it's just maybe a case of he just needs to, I don't know, maybe work on his technique of encouraging people, because it kind of looked embarrassing, because Richie was clearly not able to do any more than he was doing, and he just kept getting this guy turning around and saying, come on, and
well, I think if Froome doesn't hold up, he might have caught De Marchi right there at the very end, and they would have won. So, it was a great race by Sky. So how did we end up? Where did we end up in the GC overall, Tim?
Right, I'll have to try to remember this. Froome first, obviously. Porte second. I think he was about 50-odd seconds behind. And then Daniel Moreno, J-Rod's mountain shepherd, he jumped up to third with a really good performance on the final stage. And for Sky, the Dauphine is really becoming their race. That's 3 years in a row they've won it. It's the second year they finished 1-2. So it's clearly a race they like, and a race they like to win.
Yeah, and for those of you listening who are going to be playing our Tour de France Fantasy League, Moreno is one to keep your eye on. That's just my tip, my pro tip for Fantasy League. All right, so let's talk about... So obviously Chris Froome, with this performance, is the hot favorite for the Tour de France, and I don't think we can consider him anything else than that. But one thing that happened in this race, and... Kitty, I want to hear your theory, because you and I were talking about this right before the podcast, about your theory about how to derail the Skytrain. How can other teams or combined teams derail this train that just seems to be so dominant in the mountains?
Well, I think Valverde, Rodriguez, and Contador showed a lot of how it could be done in the Vuelta last year. I mean, it was just constant attacks. And they, I suspect that they are going to band together, and their teams are going to band together, and they are going to try to just wreck them in the first 2 weeks. So
Spanish nationalism, is it going to be Spanish nationalism against, British cycling?
But there is that, yes. But also, I think, everybody's eyes are going to be on the Spanish and then on Sky. And we were talking about Garmin was doing really well in the Tour de Suisse, Heijsedale.
Yeah.
And so it's like one of those things where, the Sharpies, they are, cunning and guile is the keywords there. And, they might actually just sneak up on, and start doing really well. I just think that, to derail the Skytrain, there just got to be a lot of people attacking. You've just got to wear out the lieutenants as quickly as you can, whether it's in the stage or as quickly as you can throughout the first 2 weeks. You've got to mix up your tactics. You just can't lay down and let them, you just can't let them get that rhythm and get that, the juggernaut thing going on, because that's, ugh. But, Valverde, Rodriguez, Contador, they are not afraid to attack. I mean, that's what they live for. I don't think they would know what to do if somebody said you cannot attack at all, because it's just not in their nature. So, I personally, I really don't care who wins the Tour this year. And if Froome wins, so good for him. I just want it to be exciting. I just don't want it to be a procession. I just don't want it to be over in like a week and a half.
Right.
So.
Go ahead, Tim.
Sorry. I think you're absolutely right, Catherine. They've got to attack. They can't be passive. And I think, although the three amigos themselves are all eminently capable of attacking and putting people under pressure, I think we've also got to look for their kind of number 2 and number 3 men as well to force Sky to make some difficult tactical decisions. So, Contador he'll have people like Chris Anker Sorensen at his disposal. Movistar will have hopefully Nairo Quintana. They'll also have Rui Costa, who's a genuine top 10 threat for GC.
We just mentioned Moreno. He's another one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a real opportunity to mix up tactics by sending some of these guys up the road and putting Sky in an awkward position, because they won't necessarily want to give someone who's capable of a top 10 or even potentially a better finish 2 or 3 minutes early in the race.
Mm.
Yeah, and Kathy, I think you're exactly right about a team like Garmin, who's going to be bringing Dan Martin, Ryder Heijsedal, Andrew Talansky, and this kid that we just saw, Rohan Dennis, right? Maybe he makes the Tour de France squad as well. It plays perfectly for a team that is kind of flies under the radar to take advantage of either getting stage wins or putting a guy at least on the podium of the Tour. So it should be exciting. It should definitely be exciting. All right, so we've talked about these guys a little bit individually. I don't want to spend too much more time on Chris Froome. Obviously, super time trialing, super mountain, super attitude, and just it looks like, now that the Wiggins thing is off his back, it's like, what could be more pressure than that, So he looks cool, calm, and collected. What do you think about Alberto?
Well,
Tim,
you can't,
Kathy.
Well, you can't rule him out.
You can't rule him out, but I think he's got some work to do.
He does, but you know what? He's going to do it, and he's going to come, and he's going to ride his heart out, and you know what? That's just going to be wonderful to see.
Yeah, and then Tim, we saw even in like the 5th stage, Valverde went out on the attack. Is he just really trying to hone his form so he's perfectly peaked right at the Tour?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it almost looked like a succession of relatively short training attacks.
Right.
And I think clearly when it comes to the Tour, he will need to pick and choose his moments. But yeah, he's more than capable. And if he does have Quintana and he has Costa around him, he's got a couple of pretty good guys who can both protect him and give him some tactical options. So he's definitely a big threat.
Yeah, and I know that Astana is sending Jakob Fuglsang as their GC guy. It was interesting to see him, attack with Samuel Sanchez, and obviously he lost that narrow stage there. But I still think he's got some work to do. He could be a guy who definitely they have to keep their eye on, but I just don't see him as being, right now, even a threat to the podium of the Tour. That's just my take on him.
Yeah, and for me, he's a guy a little bit like... who's it we were talking about at the Giro? He's great.
Guessing.
That's right, absolutely. Yeah, Hessing. He's good at 1 week races, but has he ever really proven that he can do a 3 week race? Well, he's got a 3 week race coming up now, and it's up to him really to prove us all wrong.
Yeah, and then there's the last guy who we briefly talked about, Joaquin Rodriguez, who is super duper on these punchy climbs when it's super steep, but can he get his time trialing act together, and does he have the team around him to really make this happen? Who can doubt Katusha after their Giro performance, right? I mean, they sent their B team to the Giro and they won a gazillion stages and they were awesome. So who knows what's going to happen with him? He still has a lot of work to do, though. I mean, he wasn't even in the top 10 of GC in this race. So we'll see what happens with Rodriguez. All right. Well, it's a beautiful race. The weather was nice for those guys. It was nice to see some sun shining in France. And hopefully we'll see more of the same in July. So another race that's happening right now that just started is the Tour de Suisse. And Katie, why don't you run us through some of what's going on there?
Well, we've only had 2 stages so far. Yesterday was the prologue time trial. Well, it was stage 1, but it was effectively prologue time trial. And Cameron Mayer of, is it Orica? He's Green Eggs and Ham, isn't he? He won. He set an early time that was quite well, and then the wind really kicked up, and I mean you could see barriers coming down onto the course and everything. And I mean, I've got to say the roads were looking a bit, dodgy anyway. There were some corners that a couple people just took headers on. And of course, Fabs was one of the last ones to go, and he was just in a wind the whole time.
Yeah.
And he did a storming TT, but he finished 16th. So
the weather conditions can change everything in a time trial, and it's just bad luck.
But I mean, God, he was just going like a locomotive. I would say, I am a connoisseur of Fab's form. I think he was carrying a little weight.
Oh.
But, he'll shave that off, no problem. So the only thing I really care about is Fabs, so that's why I just talked about him instead of the stage winner. Stage 2 was today, and I must admit I didn't actually watch it because I was watching the French Open. But the stage was actually curtailed because of snow. They had to take the Dauphine pass out, or I don't know how you pronounce that. And Jens Voigt actually tweeted, Tour de Suisse, first stage in the Dauphine pass is closed and cancelled. 2,500 meters high, ha ha ha. And good old Jens is so sad about that. So, the weather conditions are again playing a real part. Mollema of Blanco won the stage
Bulk Mollema,
on a breakaway. But Ryder Hajtel from the Garmin Sharp attacked in the last couple of kilometers, and from what I've read, it was quite an attack, and he just ran out of road, but he was looking really strong. But the GC Mayer is still in the lead, but Hajtel has leapt to second.
Interesting. And what's coming up there's 9 stages of this thing. Just kind of give us some highlights of what's coming up this week.
Well, stage 3 is a rolling stage. This is before the sprinters get a crack at it on stage 4. I mean, this is a little bit different from last year because Peter Sagan was just winning everything in the Tour de Suisse last year. But there's not quite so many obvious sprint stages. Another rolling stage on stage 5. And then stage 7 is actually the Queen stage. And that just looks kind of horrible. But stage 8 is an uphill time trial again. So that's where the final podium would be decided, I think.
All right.
Because the concluding 10 kilometers of the climb is about a 9% gradient. So it's, it's going to be thigh slapping after having all those climbs earlier in the week. Maybe
Fabian will lose a little bit of his weight on that final climb there.
Possibly. I mean, he still looks obviously gorgeous, and my God, the haunches are shining, but,
Oh, my gosh. All right, so Tim, I can't even talk about that anymore. What else is happening in the next 2 weeks, Tim?
Really, there's a couple of 5-day races really to look forward to over the next couple of weeks, both of which coincidentally start on the 12th and finish on the 16th. So with most of the big names competing at either the Dauphiné, the Tour de Suisse, or just resting their legs post-Euro, we've got the 5-day Tour de Luxembourg, so that starts on Wednesday. That's got a much lower profile, really. It doesn't have World Tour status. It doesn't really have any big headline climbs, so it's not one that attracts a lot of the big GC names. It's got a short prologue. It's got 4 fairly lumpy stages, all of which are kind of in the style of the Ardennes Classics. But we're not going to see many, if any, of the major tour names riding there.
Can I just say for all of our listeners, on the agenda it says meh.
For the next 2 weeks.
I know. That's as much enthusiasm as I could drum up about it. More interesting in terms of likely Tour de France stars is the Dutch Ster ZLM Tour, which runs over the same 5 days as Luxembourg. That also consists of a prologue and 4 road stages. 2 of them are pan flats. The other 2 are a little bit lumpier, but should both end in sprint finish. So basically, this is a proving ground for the sprinters. Mark Cavendish took his first career GC victory here last year. He'll be back, and he will also be joined by Andre Greipel and Marcel Kittel in what should be a dress rehearsal for 3 of the most powerful sprint trains we'll see at the Tour. And that's pretty much it, really, for the next 2 weeks.
All right. Well, and I think in the next couple of weeks, we will be getting our act together and be presenting probably a Tour de France preview. So look forward to that, people. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. It's always fun to talk about haunches and glow sticks and diversive politics in the UCI. But we will join you guys again in 2 weeks. Until then, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Velo Voices. Make sure you follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Velo Voices. And obviously make sure you go and check out the stylings and writings of our blog at velovoices.com. Kitty and Tim, have a great night.
Thanks.
Good night.
Night.
Velo Voices. Many voices. One passion. Pro cycling. For fans. By fans.